In today's video, I want to share with you how I maintain all the aquascapes in my gallery, because weirdly enough, none of them have the same maintenance routine. But first, if you're new to the channel, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for your support. Right now, I've got 7 tanks in my gallery. 2 of them are just over 20 gallons, and the rest are all nano tanks under 10 gallons in size. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, no 2 scapes of mine are the same, which means they're all maintained completely differently. For example, these 2 45Us here in the shot. Both are the same size, but both are maintained completely different. The Iwagumi is significantly different than the Biotope, and the forest tank behind me is maintained significantly differently than the Biotope off to the corner. All the tanks are completely different from each other and therefore have to be maintained in different ways. So I think the best way to explain how I maintain these tanks is just to show you. So let's get right into it. Okay, so starting off is the UNS 5S shallow scape. My first step that I do is lower the filter from the water surface down into the bottom. I like to keep this filter running at all times just because it is a small system. Next, I grab a toothbrush, and this is where I do a majority of my glass cleaning. With it being such a small tank, I don't like to use an algae scraper, and it's too small for a sponge. So I just grab a little electric toothbrush and make my way along the glass, hitting all the spots that I possibly can. Once I'm done with the glass, I'll replant some of the grass that inevitably floats up a bit when I'm using the toothbrush. The bristles catch the dwarf hairgrass blades and just kind of pull them up a little bit. So the next step is just to replace what I kind of wrecked. Next up is the trimming, and in this tank I like to keep the plants pretty low. That just allows me to preserve scale when shooting underwater. So I just simply trim and then replant the tops to create a denser, thicker bush. Same thing goes for the Juncus repens. This is a grassy type plant, so just trim the blades like you would a dwarf hairgrass, and that helps preserve the size. Now it's time to hit the hardscape, and this is where I grab that electric toothbrush again, and I really take my time hitting every crack and crevice I can find on the rocks, just to keep it as clean as possible and always have the upper hand over algae. After that, I simply start a water change, and I usually like to drain it about 50% before I refill it back up again. Now moving on is the 45U high-tech beta scape. This is the home for my beta Zuko, and this one requires a lot of trimming. First things first though, I like to turn off the filter. This allows me to trim at whatever speed I need to without having to worry about the plants blowing all over the place. Once again, in this situation, I just replant the tops that I trimmed off. This helps promote denser, thicker growth in the plants. Now when it comes to trimming the Rotala, this is a weekly task. And there's no technique here other than just maintaining the shape that I want the Rotala to grow in. Again, this is one of those things that happens weekly, and I just kind of blow through it as fast as I can because there's not really a super technical technique to this. Same thing with the Ludwigia Super Red on the corner. I just like to keep that lower and create a denser bush. After that, it's time to pull out the equipment. Really the only equipment in this tank is the CO2 diffuser. So once I pull that out, I pick up all the Rotala trimmings with my fish net, and that allows me to prepare for the water change. Before I start the water change though, this is the most tedious part, and that is hitting the rocks with this electric toothbrush. I like to keep my rocks as clean and natural looking as possible, so I don't like dust or algae on them. I like to keep them very spotless. So this is where I hit all the cracks and crevices with my electric toothbrush. The water gets really foggy, but it's worth it in the end, and I'll be doing a water change next, so it's totally fine. One final thing before the water change is a glass cleaning, and this is where I just take my algae scraper, going up and down on all sides of the tank to make sure there's no algae on the glass. Now it's time for the water change, and just like the shallow tank, I like to drain about 50% of the water. I find that just a 50% water change weekly helps this tank thrive. While the water change is happening, this is when I take care of the hard water stains on the edge. Just a simple spray with citrus and water mixed together, and your hard water stains are gone and the tank looks clear and brand new. Now, in order to maintain a flawless aquascape, you have to focus on the tiniest of details. I like to take the soil pieces that have fallen through the rocks and pick them up one by one, placing them in the soil areas and keeping them out of the sand. Now that the water is back in, it's time to re-add my CO2 diffuser and connect it to my CO2 tubing. Last thing that's left is to turn on the filter again and enjoy the tank. Next up is the 45U Iwagumi scape housing my blue rilly shrimp. And the maintenance on this one's pretty simple. First thing I want to point out is, yes, I am aware of the chip on the glass. Please don't remind me about it. With that being said, next up is to remove the equipment because these lily pipes need to be cleaned. Once the lily pipes are taken off, now it's time to hit the glass with an algae scraper and just make sure everything is spotless. One thing to make note of is I always do the edges of the tank, which has the silicone on it, with a toothbrush. I never want to run my razor blade on this for fear of cracking or breaking the silicone. So a toothbrush just is a nice, soft, and easy way to avoid damaging the silicone. Next up is the tedious thing of trimming the moss. Typically, any aquascaper would use scissors for this kind of occasion, but I've found when I use scissors, I tend to lose pieces of moss in the water, and then I find them growing later on in the carpet. So by pulling them out one by one with my tweezers, this allows me to not lose any pieces in my dwarf hairgrass carpet, which is just a pain to get out once it establishes. It's tedious, but it's worth it in the end. Once that's done, it's time to do a quick surface clean with my net. This is just to get any floating pieces of plant or dwarf hairgrass blades, which are very annoying to have to siphon out on the surface. Now it's time for the water change, and I usually like to do a quick carpet siphon in areas where I may see a shrimp exoskeleton or remaining food that these guys might have left behind. Just like all my tanks, I perform a 50% water change in every tank once a week. I do the same thing that I did with Zuko's tank with the hard water stain. And again, that just helps this tank look clean and sleek on all the edges. Once the water change is done, it's time to reattach the lily pipes. You want to be careful with this since they are glass. I don't want to break them. Once the lily pipes are back installed, it's time to turn on the filter and get that surface all cleaned with the surface skimmer. Once the filter is back up and running, I like to add a weekly dosage of APT Complete from 2 Hour Aquarius. Now when it comes to the South American Biotope inspired tank, I really don't do anything to this. It's got a very wild feel, and I'm sure you can see that. Usually I'll do a once a month water change, and I'll just leave it at that. And last but not least is the Dual 60 AQUASCAPE. This is the tank I definitely spend most of my time working on just to make it perfect. First order of business with any maintenance session is to take a glance and inspect the tank to see exactly what kind of work needs to be done. Next up is turning off the filter so I can start the maintenance. Now it's time to trim any dead leaves or any plants that might need trimming. This usually involves doing some bucephalandra leaves that might have breaks or cuts in them. As well as some of the dwarf hairgrass that might be creeping into the sand foreground. With this specific section of the hairgrass carpet, I really like to take my time and make sure that I'm super detail oriented and very meticulous with every cut I make. Now is when I usually grab any loose floating pieces of algae that I can just pull out with my tweezers. Then I bring out the big guns with my electric toothbrush, and this is when I spend most of my time on the hardscape, just really deep cleaning all the cracks and crevices in the wood. This way I ensure that I'm getting as much algae as I possibly can off, which gives me the upper hand in maintenance. Once I'm done with the electric toothbrush, this is when I bring out the steel brush. And this is the time when I really just pick at the hardscape to get any tough little piece of algae that might be there. And I really take my time to get every crack and crevice of every piece of hardscape, even if it doesn't look like it needs it. Then it's a quick glass clean over the course of the entire tank. Just like every setup I have, I always clean the glass with this razor blade. And since we're talking meticulous details, I grab a small siphon tube and I suck up any remaining pieces of aqua soil in the sand foreground. This just keeps the whole area nice and clean looking. Then with my tweezers, I grab any dead plant matter that might be stuck in the intake of the filter. This way the water flow is clear and quick. Once that's done, it's another quick inspection to make sure I didn't miss anything, and then it's the water change. For this specific setup, the water didn't need to be changed too much because it was already pretty clean, so I'll be doing a 25% water change in this week's maintenance session. Once the water is filled back up, I give a quick mist to all the immersed growing bulbitis. This ensures that it stays nice and moist and doesn't dry out and die. Once that's done, it's time to turn on the filter once again. And then I add 3 pumps of APT0, which is a starter fertilizer. Then it's time to quickly clean the glass on the outside to make sure it's a nice, crisp, clear image into the tank. I quickly take a look at the CO2 to make sure the tank is still full. And now, all that's left to do is enjoy the tank. So that's it. That's how I maintain my tanks in my gallery. It can be a lot of work at times, but once it's all done, it's definitely worth it. I think the key to getting it all done in one day and not having to spend several days working on all my tanks is having a manageable amount of tanks in your gallery. At the moment, I don't think I could handle any more tanks than I've already got, but who knows what the future holds. For now, I've been able to create and integrate a system that works well with my work schedule, and that's the most important thing. I think one of the biggest keys to keeping a beautiful aquascape and keeping it clean looking is consistent, meticulous maintenance. So find a number of tanks that works for you and doesn't seem overwhelming, and just stick with that and make sure that you can maintain all your tanks that you have as beautifully and meticulously as possible. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and let me know in the comments below what your favorite scape of mine is. And if you're not subscribed, please go ahead and do so. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.